My ex-wife tried to run me and my girlfriend down in a mall parking lot. She accelerated her Honda straight toward us in broad daylight, aiming for a double kill because she couldn't handle seeing me happy after I caught her cheating in our bedroom with another man. Emma and I were holding purple orchids, her favorite flowers, when the car came flying across the lot. This was the same woman I'd financially supported for 3 years while she worked part-time at a boutique. The same woman whose affair I'd discovered and quietly documented. The same woman who'd spent months sending me novel-length text messages about how I'd ruined her life by refusing to bankroll her after the divorce. The most disturbing part wasn't just the attempt itself. It was the certainty. She genuinely believed she was the victim, that my moving on after her betrayal somehow justified killing us. 3 security cameras recorded everything in high definition. A soccer mom's 911 call captured the moment. A teenager filmed the attack on his phone. A retired police officer tackled her to the ground while she screamed that I'd stolen her future, the same future she threw away when she chose to cheat. What makes this story different is that I wasn't surprised. For 12 months, I'd followed one rule that saved my life, my assets, and my sanity. Document everything, every threat, every violation of the restraining order, every unhinged voicemail where she admitted to hiding marital assets. When the judge later handed down a 12-year sentence for attempted murder, I walked out owing her nothing. No alimony, no sympathy, and no apologies. Just proof. Before I became someone who documents everything, I was someone who trusted everything. I married Carolyn 3 years earlier, believing I'd found a partner who appreciated what I could provide. I had a stable 6-figure income in tech consulting. Carolyn worked part-time at a high-end boutique, more for social interaction than financial necessity. The arrangement made sense to me. I handled the major expenses while she focused on what she called finding herself and exploring her passions. Looking back, I should have questioned why her passions always seemed to require my credit card. The mortgage, utilities, car payments, insurance, groceries, even her student loan payments all came out of my income. Her boutique paycheck went toward what she called personal expenses. When I asked for clarity, she said talking about money killed the romance. That phrase stuck with me longer than it should have. Killed the romance. It became her answer to everything uncomfortable. Budgets killed romance, boundaries killed romance, questions killed romance. So I stopped asking. I told myself that love meant trust, and trust meant not keeping score. I ignored the quiet resentment building every time I transferred money or picked up another bill without discussion. I didn't realize I wasn't avoiding conflict. I was training myself not to notice it. I told myself that was normal. The warning signs were there from the beginning, but I performed mental gymnastics that would have impressed Olympic judges. When she complained that I worked too much, I told myself she missed me. When she mocked my hobbies as boring, I convinced myself she was pushing me to grow. When she came home late from girls' nights, I framed it as healthy independence. When she guarded her phone like it contained state secrets, I called it respecting boundaries. The way she talked about money should have stopped me cold. Everything I earned was ours, but anything she wanted was essential. If I questioned a 4-figure charge on the credit card, I was suddenly controlling and obsessed with numbers. What hurts now is remembering how hard I tried to be the husband she claimed to want. I took extra projects to afford the European vacation she needed to reset. I worked weekends to pay for designer clothes that made her feel confident. I apologized for being exhausted after 12-hour days that funded her yoga retreats and spa weekends. I became an ATM with abandonment issues and called it love. I was so busy trying to be the perfect husband that I forgot to be the observant one. The affair revealed itself on a Tuesday afternoon when I came home early with food poisoning. I'd been at a client meeting that morning when my stomach staged a full revolt, so I drove home expecting nothing more dramatic than a quiet bed and electrolyte drinks. Instead, I opened the bedroom door and found Carolyn with a man I'd never seen before. Not hiding, not scrambling, just casually betraying 3 years of marriage in the bed I paid for, on the sheets I'd bought. My first instinct wasn't rage. It was documentation. I pulled out my phone and took photos of everything. The two of them, the scattered clothes, the wine glasses on the nightstand. Proof that this wasn't confusion or a lapse in judgment. Proof that it was real. They didn't even notice me standing there at first. When Carolyn finally looked up and saw me, her expression wasn't guilt or shock. It was irritation, like I'd interrupted something important. I finished documenting before I said a word. When I confronted her later, Carolyn responded with what I now recognize as a masterclass in gaslighting. No apology, no explanation, just immediate counterattack. "You're never here anyway," she said, straightening her boutique clothes like nothing had happened. "What did you expect? I have needs you obviously can't meet." When I showed her the photos, she accused me of violating her privacy. When I asked how long the affair had been going on, she said that was the wrong question. I should be asking why she felt so lonely she had to find connection elsewhere. "Maybe if you paid attention to me instead of just paying my bills, this wouldn't have happened," she said. "You treat me like a roommate who happens to sleep in your bed." Even caught red-handed, she was turning it into my failure. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with someone who made a mistake. I was dealing with someone who would rewrite reality to avoid consequences. That realization changed everything about how I approached the divorce. If Carolyn was willing to rewrite reality, I needed to make sure reality was documented too thoroughly to edit. I called a lawyer the next morning, not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in high-conflict divorces involving significant assets. The first thing he told me matched exactly what I'd already started doing instinctively. Document everything. Every text message, every email, every phone call, he said. Screenshot it before she deletes it. If she makes threats, record them. If she hides assets, track them. Documentation wins these cases. I bought a dedicated phone for recording conversations in my state, where one-party consent was legal. I set up a separate email account for all divorce-related communication. I backed up every interaction to cloud storage Carolyn couldn't access. Document everything stopped being advice and became a survival rule. What surprised me most wasn't the hostility, it was the entitlement. Carolyn wrote like she still expected access. Access to my time, my attention, my money, and my emotional labor. Even while insulting me, she assumed I'd respond. Even while mocking me, she demanded explanations. The anger wasn't about the divorce itself. It was about losing control over the narrative. Every message followed the same pattern. Accusation, justification, demand. Then a pivot back to how unfairly she was being treated. Reading them back to back made something click. This wasn't someone trying to fix a marriage. This was someone spiraling because accountability had finally entered the room. That realization changed how I read every word she sent, not as communication, but as escalation. What I didn't expect was how eagerly Carolyn would help me follow it. Within a week of filing, the messages started. Not short bursts of anger, novels, multi-paragraph manifestos arriving at all hours, 2 a.m. Texts explaining how the affair was actually my fault. Afternoon dissertations about how I'd emotionally abandoned her long before she found physical comfort elsewhere. They weren't just vindictive, they were confessional. She admitted to the affair in writing, described it in humiliating detail, mocked my performance, then somehow concluded that all of this made her the victim. Every message tried to rewrite history while simultaneously preserving it. Each text became another exhibit. The financial escalation began when my lawyer suggested a forensic accountant. "If she's lying about adultery," he said, "she's probably lying about money too." He was right. The accountant uncovered 3 bank accounts I didn't know existed. Credit cards in Carolyn's name she'd never mentioned. Investment accounts funded by money that should have gone toward household expenses. Even a shell consulting business she'd registered without telling me. An entity that existed only on paper but quietly received transfers. For 3 years while I worked extra hours to support our lifestyle, Carolyn had been building a parallel financial life. That was the moment I understood something important. This wasn't just a divorce. It was an unraveling. 6 months into the divorce proceedings, I met Emma at a coffee shop near my office. She was a project manager at a nonprofit, someone who understood deadlines and documentation, someone who appreciated honesty after years of working with people who either delivered or didn't. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. She talked about helping families navigate housing assistance programs. I talked about learning to document everything. We bonded over dealing with people who rewrite reality when it stops serving them. On our 3rd date, I bought her purple orchids. She told me they were her favorite flower, delicate looking, but surprisingly resilient. The metaphor wasn't lost on either of us. Emma knew about Carolyn from the beginning. I showed her the text messages, not to trauma dump, but to be transparent. Emma read through them quietly, then said, "This woman sounds exhausting. How long do you think it'll take her to realize she lost?" I didn't have an answer. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly Emma's presence would accelerate Carolyn's unraveling. The harassment had always been focused on me. Once Carolyn learned I was dating someone, it expanded outward. She began showing up at my workplace, pretending to be lost in the lobby. She called my office claiming to be a client, then launched into rants about how I'd destroyed her life. She found Emma's nonprofit online and started emailing staff, accusing me of being unstable and financially abusive. None of it was subtle, none of it was deniable. That was when my lawyer advised me to seek a restraining order. Carolyn violated it within 2 weeks. She parked outside my building for hours at a time. She sent messages referencing places Emma and I had been earlier that day. Once she left a note on my car that simply read, "You don't get to replace me." That was the moment something shifted. This wasn't harassment anymore. It was fixation. Emma noticed it before I wanted to admit it. She started asking small, practical questions. Whether my building had cameras, whether I varied my commute, whether Carolyn knew which mall we usually went to on weekends. None of it sounded dramatic when she asked. Just cautious, methodical, the way someone plans around real risk instead of imagined fear. I reviewed the footage from my building's security system more carefully after that. Carolyn appeared in frame 3 different times over a 10-day period, always at a distance, always leaving before security could question her. Once she stood across the street for nearly 40 minutes, just watching the entrance. I saved every clip. The texts shifted too. Less rage, more certainty. She stopped arguing about the divorce and started talking about destiny, about how Emma was temporary, about how I would come back once this phase ended. That language scared me more than the insults ever had. My lawyer reviewed everything and didn't hesitate. "This is escalation," he said. "The pattern matters. The fixation matters. You need to assume she's capable of doing something irrational." That night I moved copies of every file to an external drive and gave it to someone I trusted. I didn't know when she would cross the line, only that she was getting closer. That weekend, I spread everything across my dining room table like a detective organizing a murder case. 3 years of marriage had produced more evidence than most felony investigations. Chronological timeline of every interaction, screenshots of text messages organized by date and threat level, bank statements highlighting every suspicious transaction, photos from the affair discovery, security footage of Carolyn's surveillance, witness statements from coworkers who'd fielded her unhinged phone calls. What struck me wasn't just the volume, it was the pattern. Each piece of evidence connected to the next like links in a chain. The financial deception enabled the lifestyle that supported the affair. The affair justified the harassment. The harassment escalated into stalking. The stalking was building towards something worse. My lawyer had been right about documentation. Every screenshot, every saved voicemail, every security clip told a story that Carolyn couldn't revise or deny. This wasn't he said, she said anymore. This was a comprehensive record of someone losing control. 3 years of marriage produced a filing cabinet of evidence. The text messages alone filled 40 pages when printed. I'd organized them into categories: financial threats, personal attacks, admissions of adultery, and what my lawyer called evidence of mental instability. Reading them consecutively was like watching someone's psychological breakdown in real time. The early messages were manipulative but coherent. The middle period showed increasing desperation and rage. The recent ones revealed someone completely detached from reality. She'd written detailed confessions about the affair, including dates, locations, and her partner's name. She'd admitted to hiding marital assets. She'd threatened to destroy me financially and personally. She'd even described her surveillance activities as keeping tabs on what's mine. Each message was time-stamped and backed up in 3 separate locations. Carolyn had created a digital confession spanning months of criminal behavior. She'd confessed to everything in writing. The witness network had developed naturally. I hadn't asked people to take sides, they'd simply documented what they observed. My office receptionist had kept records of every fake client call Carolyn made. Building security had footage and incident reports from her unauthorized visits. Emma's nonprofit colleagues had saved the harassing emails about my instability. My neighbors had started texting me whenever they saw Carolyn's car parked outside my building. Even people who barely knew me had begun offering support. The coffee shop owner where Emma and I went for our first date mentioned he'd noticed some woman taking photos of us through the window. A server at our regular restaurant said a woman matching Carolyn's description had come in asking questions about our typical reservation times. The community wasn't choosing sides, they were protecting themselves from someone whose behavior had become obviously threatening. What surprised me most was how many people had been quietly documenting Carolyn's escalation without me asking. They'd saved screenshots of her social media posts about me. They'd kept copies of emails she'd sent to their workplaces. They'd recorded phone calls where she'd made threats or revealed information about my personal life. Carolyn had made enemies of people she'd never met. When my lawyer reviewed everything, his confidence was immediate and absolute. "This is the strongest harassment and financial fraud case I've seen in 15 years of practice," he said. "She's created a paper trail that leads directly to conviction on multiple charges." He walked through each category of evidence methodically. The adultery was proven with photos and written admissions. The financial fraud was documented with bank records and forensic accounting. The harassment was established with hundreds of texts, emails, and recorded calls. The stalking was verified with security footage and witness statements. If she escalates to physical violence, we'll have overwhelming evidence of premeditation and pattern behavior, he said. This level of documentation doesn't just win civil cases, it supports criminal charges. The divorce settlement was already decided in my favor. No alimony, no shared assets, no ongoing obligations. If Carolyn crossed the line into criminal behavior, the evidence would ensure serious consequences. The lawyers smiled when they saw my documentation. What none of the documents captured was the feeling that settled in my chest as I looked at the timeline laid out in front of me. This wasn't chaos, it was progression. Every escalation followed the same logic. When lying stopped working, she intimidated. When intimidation failed, she stalked. When stalking stopped getting a reaction, she fixated. People don't de-escalate from fixation. I realized then that the evidence wasn't just about protecting my assets or winning a divorce. It was about establishing intent before intent turned into action. I didn't know how she would cross the line, only that she was moving toward it. That's when my lawyer said something that stuck with me. When someone documents this much instability, the question isn't if something happens. It's whether anyone is prepared when it does. I made sure we were prepared. Being prepared meant practical changes, not paranoid ones. I installed a better security system at my apartment with cameras that uploaded directly to the cloud. I started varying my commute routes and timing. I gave Emma and my lawyer emergency contact numbers and check-in protocols. But I refused to let Carolyn's instability turn us into prisoners. Emma and I still went to dinner, still visited the farmer's market on weekends, still lived our lives. We just did it more carefully. I kept a file folder in my car with copies of the restraining order and key evidence photos. Emma had backup copies of everything on her phone. We established simple code words for different types of emergency situations. The security measures weren't about fear, they were about preparation. If Carolyn escalated, we'd be ready to document it. If she tried to manipulate the narrative afterward, we'd have witnesses and evidence ready to contradict her story. We lived carefully, but we still lived. What struck me most about Emma during this period was her refusal to be intimidated. She never suggested I should handle Carolyn differently or try to de-escalate the situation. She understood that you can't negotiate with someone who's rewriting reality in real time. Emma integrated into my life with quiet determination. She met my friends and family, not despite the drama, but through it. She helped me organize evidence files and accompanied me to legal meetings. She made sure I ate regular meals and got enough sleep when the stress started affecting my health. When I bought her purple orchids for our 6-month anniversary, she planted them in containers so we could take them with us if we needed to move quickly. The metaphor wasn't lost on either of us. Something beautiful that could be portable if circumstances required. Emma told her family about the situation, not for drama, but for safety. Her brother, a police officer in another state, reviewed our security plans and offered practical suggestions. Her parents insisted on meeting me not to judge the situation, but to understand what their daughter was facing. Emma stayed, knowing Carolyn was still out there. The final warning signs came in subtle shifts that only made sense in hindsight. Carolyn's text messages became less frequent but more focused. Instead of novel-length rants, she sent short, specific observations about where Emma and I had been or what we'd been doing. She knew which grocery store we preferred. She knew Emma's work schedule, she knew which entrance I used at my office building, and approximately when I arrived each morning. The surveillance had become systematic. My building security guard mentioned seeing the same woman parked across the street multiple times during the past month. Always in different cars, always at a distance, but clearly watching the building entrance. The coffee shop owner where Emma and I had our first date said someone matching Carolyn's description had been asking the staff about our usual table and whether we had a regular schedule. Even more disturbing were the messages from mutual acquaintances saying Carolyn had contacted them with questions about my new life and whether I seemed actually happy or was just acting out. She was conducting research, gathering intelligence about our relationship and routine. The pattern was unmistakable. She was planning something. We should have known Carolyn was planning something final. The mistake was thinking planning always announces itself loudly. Sometimes it hides in silence. Carolyn stopped texting entirely that week. No rants, no accusations, no late-night messages demanding explanations or reconciliation. For the first time in months, there was nothing. My lawyer noticed it too. "This isn't de-escalation," he said. "This is focus." Emma and I talked about it that night. Not emotionally, tactically. Where we'd park, which exits we'd use, how close together we'd walk, what we'd do if something felt off. Neither of us said the word out loud, but we both understood it. People who stop trying to control the narrative verbally often move on to controlling reality physically. The question was no longer whether Carolyn would cross the line. It was when and whether we'd be standing in the wrong place when she did. Saturday started like any other weekend. Emma and I went to the mall to pick up purple orchids for her mother's birthday. We developed a routine over the months. Garden center first, then lunch, maybe some window shopping if we had time. The mall was busy but not crowded. Families with kids, elderly couples, teenagers in groups, normal people doing normal weekend activities. Emma was comparing two different orchid varieties when I noticed the parking lot security cameras positioned at perfect intervals. For once, I wasn't thinking about documentation or surveillance or threats. I was just watching Emma decide between purple and white flowers, listening to her explain why her mother would prefer the deeper color. "Purple orchids it is," she said, smiling as we headed toward the checkout counter. "We were just buying flowers when Carolyn tried to kill us." The attack happened in the parking lot as we walked back to my truck. Emma was carrying the orchid container, I was pushing an empty cart, and we were discussing where to have lunch when I heard an engine rev behind us. I turned and saw Carolyn's silver Honda accelerating directly toward us from across the lot. Not swerving accidentally, not trying to stop, accelerating with clear intent. The sound was unmistakable, and in an engine being pushed to its limit, tires squealing against asphalt. Emma heard it too and turned just as I grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the nearest row of parked cars. I grabbed Emma and dove between two parked cars just as Carolyn's bumper caught the shopping cart I'd been pushing. The cart flew 15 feet and crashed into a light pole with enough force to dent the metal. Emma's orchid container shattered against the concrete, purple petals scattering across the asphalt like confetti from a nightmare celebration. We landed hard between a minivan and a sedan, my shoulder taking most of the impact as I tried to shield Emma from the fall. Carolyn kept going for another 20 yards before slamming on her brakes. Her car stopped in the middle of the driving lane, blocking traffic. I could see her through the windshield, hands still gripping the steering wheel, staring at the spot where we'd been standing. 3 different cameras caught her accelerating toward us. What happened next proved that sometimes communities protect themselves without being asked. A soccer mom who'd witnessed everything immediately called 911 while running over to check if we were hurt. Her voice was shaky but clear as she gave the dispatcher our exact location and described what she'd seen. "A woman just tried to run over 2 people in the Eastgate Mall parking lot," she said. "It wasn't an accident. She aimed for them." A teenager with his phone out had started recording when he heard the engine rev, capturing the entire attack from start to finish. His video showed not just the attack itself, but Carolyn's deliberate positioning beforehand and her reaction afterward. Most importantly, a retired police officer who'd been loading groceries into his car saw the whole sequence and immediately understood what he was witnessing. When Carolyn got out of her car and started screaming about how I'd stolen her life, the retired cop calmly walked over and restrained her until patrol units arrived. His 25 years of experience meant he knew exactly how to handle someone in the middle of a violent breakdown. "Ma'am, you just committed attempted vehicular homicide," he told her. I suggest you remain quiet until you speak with an attorney. But Carolyn couldn't remain quiet. She kept ranting about how Emma was temporary and how I belonged to her, providing audio evidence that this wasn't an accident or a moment of poor judgment. Every word she spoke was being recorded by multiple phones and the mall's security system. A retired police officer held Carolyn until backup arrived. The responding officers treated this as what it was, a serious felony with multiple witnesses and video evidence. Carolyn was arrested on the spot and charged with 2 counts of attempted murder, stalking, harassment, and violation of a restraining order. The lead officer took statements from all 6 witnesses, collected the teenager's video evidence, and requested immediate access to the mall's security footage. Everything was documented and preserved while Carolyn sat in the back of the patrol car, still insisting she was the victim. No bail was granted, the evidence was too strong and the threat too obvious. When Carolyn's lawyer arrived at the station, he took one look at the security footage and the witness statements and advised her to accept whatever plea deal was offered. The case wasn't about guilt or innocence, it was about how many years she'd spend in prison. Even her lawyer looked embarrassed by her story. As the patrol car pulled away, I noticed something strange about the parking lot. No one was yelling, no one was debating what they'd seen. People were quiet, focused, already certain about what had happened. That's when it hit me. This wasn't shocking to them, it was clear. There were too many angles, too many witnesses, too much documentation for interpretation to survive. Carolyn didn't lose control in that parking lot. She followed it there. Everything she'd done for months, the surveillance, the silence, the fixation, had been leading to this moment. Not because she snapped, but because she decided. Emma squeezed my hand, still shaking, and said quietly, "You were right. She was always going to do this." She wasn't wrong. We just happened to be prepared when she did. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. Carolyn's defense attorney tried to argue temporary insanity, but the evidence told a different story. The months of systematic surveillance, the calculated silence before the attack, the precise positioning in the parking lot. This wasn't a breakdown, it was premeditation. When the prosecution played the security footage in slow motion, showing Carolyn accelerating toward us with clear intent, several jurors visibly recoiled. When they heard the audio of her post-attack rants about ownership and destiny, the case was over. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing. "This was not a crime of passion," he said. "This was attempted murder carried out by someone who believed another person's happiness justified their death." 12 years felt like justice. The financial settlement was equally decisive. Carolyn's hidden assets and documented fraud voided any claim to alimony or shared property. The forensic accountant's report showed she'd actually stolen from me during our marriage, not contributed to it. I walked away owing her nothing. No monthly payments, no shared debts, no ongoing obligations. The judge even ordered her to pay my legal fees as part of the restitution. For the first time in years, my income was entirely my own. I walked away owing her nothing but pity. Emma and I bought a house 6 months later. Small, quiet, with a garden where we could plant purple orchids properly. The security system was good but not excessive. We lived carefully but not fearfully. Sometimes neighbors asked about the trial they'd seen on the news. I'd give them the basic facts, nothing more. The story wasn't about drama, it was about documentation, boundaries, and the importance of recognizing when someone's rewriting reality becomes dangerous. Emma's orchids bloom every spring now, resilient and beautiful in the morning light. We have dinner on the patio and talk about normal things. Work projects, weekend plans. Which movies to watch. Sometimes documenting everything means you get to keep everything. What I didn't expect was how quiet life became once the danger was gone. No constant vigilance, no background fear, no need to explain myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. Documentation didn't just protect me in court, it gave me clarity long before the verdict. It showed me who was lying, who was escalating, and when walking away wasn't enough anymore. Carolyn believed she could rewrite reality if she insisted loudly enough. She was wrong. Reality doesn't bend to obsession, it records it. Emma leaned into me one night, watching the orchids sway in the evening breeze, and said, "This is what safety feels like." She was right, and for the first time, that was enough.